Oh, you got it too. Oh, you got it. Oh, you got it. You got it.
Welcome to Brother to Brother Talk, and I'm Mark Carbonell, Managing Director of the Midwest Minority Think Tank. And once again, we are delighted to be able to share with you as it relates to Brother Talk, that which is current, that which is pertinent, and that which will make a difference. It's not just idle uh, conversation. It's solution oriented, solution driven. And we are here tonight to continue our discussion on Black political free agency. Black political free agency. We started this conversation last edition, dealing with one man that changed free agency in all of sports. And I want to recap a little bit about that and add a second name to the dialogue. And Curt Flood was a prominent baseball player with the St. Louis Cardinals. He was a perennial all-star, uh, led the league in hits a couple of times. Just an absolutely phenomenal defensive player in center field. But he was also an astute man of social consciousness. And during that era, uh, and this was the height of baseball in the 1960s. During that era, there was something called the reserve clause. If you signed a contract 1 year with a team, the team had the reserve clause for the next year. And so, in essence, you could never be free of the team that you signed with. However, that team could trade you to another team, but you would then be bound by the original contract with the next team. And the reserve clause was part of baseball, and it continued uh, and until Curt Flood took the extraordinary step of filing a lawsuit and sitting out of baseball rather than play, and which eventually cost him his career uh, and being banned from baseball. But he changed free agency. He changed the way baseball players and other athletes that followed in other sports were able to negotiate their contracts and become what was free agent, and negotiate and get the top dollars that we hear about and read about today. Of course, as in so many cases, Curt Flood was not able to reap those benefits. Also, in that same premise, as Curt Flood changed baseball, there was another black man that changed football. We rarely ever hear his name, R.C. Owens. And R.C. Owens was a college man went to college at the University of Idaho. But it was his his stance, similar to Curt Flood, that changed free agency in football. R.C. Owens, he went from the San Francisco 49ers to the Baltimore Colts at that time, the Baltimore Colts. And these two men, Curt Flood, black man, R.C. Owens, black man, paved the way for the astronomical sums of money that we hear about today. The $100 million quarterbacks, and in the case of the most recent signing of Patrick Mahomes for a $500 million, $500 million. But it was those two men, Curt Flood and R.C. Owens, Curt Flood in baseball, and R.C. Owens in football. Two black men who we don't hear much about. They were in the era of the civil rights movement, but when history is told now, they are not mentioned. The impact that they had on the economics of the black community and the economic of pro sports. Two men acting alone, not with not in as a cohesive unit, not with any major organization behind them, but because they were individuals of integrity, individuals who understood what was the landscape of their time, and two individuals who were able to muster the courage uh, to see the challenge and live up to it and bring about a change now, and that men can receive a $500 million for playing a sport. That these two men laid the foundation and groundwork, and certainly history has not given them their proper place. And many of our young athletes may not even be aware of these two names, Curt Flood and R.C. Owens. When I come back, I will relate how the actions of Curt Flood and R.C. Owens uh, has have laid the foundation for black uh, political free agency.
This is Brother to Brother Talk. We will take a break and we'll be right back. I'm Mark Carbone, Managing Director of the Midwest Minority Think Tank. We'll be back with more solution-driven dialogue on Brother to Brother Talk.
PremiumBeat.com.
Welcome back to Brother to Brother Talk. I'm Mark Carbone, Managing Director of the Midwest Minority Think Tank, and we're dealing with black political free agency. And we went over the two men who, just briefly touched on the two men who literally changed the economics of sports in the United States and, of course, around the world. But more specifically, Curt Flood and his stance against Major League Baseball's reserve clause, and R.C. Owens doing a similar step with the NFL, the National Football League. These two men laid the foundation for economic change, and so we are facing a dilemma now because these two men challenged the binding agreements that led to free agency. But now we have an informal binding agreement between the black voters and their affiliation with one party. And that has robbed the community of the strength and power that it possesses, simply because when you are operating on a reserve clause, That's what Major League Baseball had. And so politically, uh, if you're going from election to election and you are going to remain with the same political party election cycle after election cycle, you basically have signed yourself to a reserve clause and hoping that you will impress the political party of your affiliation by turning out in your numbers that they will give you a raise. That's how the athletes were uh, operating before free agency. If you had a good year or an exceptional year, you could expect the owner of the team to give you a raise, but you had no real negotiation power because they own the rights to you for the next year, so you couldn't go anyplace else. So basically, uh, if you tried to hold out for a larger raise than what they were willing to give you, you had no real leverage, and so you would have to basically accept the salary, and they controlled the salary. So it was a collusion because all the owners could say, well, this is as much as we're going to pay any individual in that position annually. And so there was no real bargaining power until Curt Flood challenged the reserve clause. And so when we bring that to the political arena, you don't have any power to challenge or negotiate if your only time to negotiate is based on whether your political party wins, and then you hope that they give you a few choice jobs or a few indicators that we want you to come back next time because we are holding that reserve clause. So a few individuals, and I'm not demeaning their abilities to fulfill the roles and the jobs that they get, but the millions of people in the Black community that support these candidates are coming away with nothing but a few jobs for millions, and then you have no negotiating power because you've already signed on as being a loyal contributor to this one particular party. And so that you're not getting anything because the other team or the other parties know that you're already under a reserve clause to the one party. So they're not listening to you because you're not willing to move off your reserve clause. And a few designated leaders getting a few choice jobs and millions of people are getting nothing. That's not doing the populace or the multitude the justice that it should have for the guilt that's placed upon them if they don't stay on the reserve clause, reservation, plantation, party affiliation. Black political free agency is our issues have to be at the forefront for the multitude and not just a few choice jobs. I want to say a little bit more about the statements of the status rather of the current alignment that's being taken for granted and being perpetuated in the Black community that needs to be addressed uh, as to how do we move away from this reserve clause that has the vote already bound over to the next election and to the election following that, because the negotiating power is given away when you do not have options. And as I laid out the structure with Curt Flood in Major League Baseball and R.C. Owens with the NFL and National Football League, until there were options, salaries were controlled, individuals were retained until they were their rights were traded to someone else or another team. And so until the black political power becomes free agency, our issues, our concerns are not going to be properly addressed. And so we have to rely on the so-called goodness of the elected official to come back after the election, after he or she has received power, that they might do something good. And that might come in the form of high profile position. But the real concern then is not having a face any longer. We fought this in the 50s and 60s. It was magnificent to see a black man or a black woman to ascend to a position, a prestigious position. But meanwhile, millions of the multitude have not been able to make that leap and make that advance. And so as a result, the invisible reserve clause has remained intact. I'm Mark Carbon-Owens, Managing Director of the Midwest Minority Think Tank, and we'll be right back with more Brother to Brother Talk.
This is Brother to Brother Talk. We will take a break and we'll be right back. I'm Mark Carbon-Owens, Managing Director of the Midwest Minority Think Tank. We'll be back with more solution-driven dialogue on Brother to Brother Talk.
PremierBeef.com.
How do I write my life story? I know hurt and pain. I don't like either one, whether physical or emotional. Herein contains my story, Not Without Scars, Part 2. Optimism, perseverance, persistence, resilience. 2 decades of personal struggle. Optimism. I faced the new millennium with hopefulness. Perseverance. My ego, my humble beginnings, my desire to achieve never allow me to turn away from a difficult task. Persistence. Opposition should be anticipated as an effective strategy to victory surfaces. Resilience. Difficulties do not automatically spell termination. Scars reveal my imperfection as reminders of past episodes of pain, sorrow, or triumph. Scars can tell beautiful story endings or relay misery that wishes to remain anonymous. This work is meant to help others who have experienced decades of struggle. When struggles appear to never end, you must get through the night and face the challenge of a new dawn with fresh hope. The Great Lockdown of 2020, a mid-crisis analytical report, represents a historical work. The people provide indicators to their needs and roles in building and establishing the new norm. The voice of the people places at the fingertips of decision makers knowledge of how the area's resources should be deployed to best serve the society and address the needs and concerns of the people going forward. This study serves as a guide to where key research should be directed and sets the course to engage resources during crises by future social theoreticians. Comparison of responses on multiple levels provide an uncanny insight. The capture of a population's response in the midst of a crisis compared to a post-crisis reflection shall prove to be of monumental value into human reactions facing uncertainty during and post a calamity.
Welcome back to Brothers Talk. I'm Mark Carbon-Owens, Managing Director of the Midwest Minority Think Tank, and we're discussing this evening Black political free agency. And we've used as a foundation the actions of Curt Flood and his stance against the reserve clause in Major League Baseball, and R.C. Owens, who took a similar action against the National Football League. And as a result of the action of these two men, uh, the Major League Sports, the economic impact of it has been changed forever. And many young men, black men especially, have become millionaires as a result of the action of these two men. And now, and now we're looking at the same type necessity in the black community for our political power to take that stand. And this is not a reverse a bigotry or statements of racism or even uh, uh, racial pride in the sense of isolationism. But we cannot allow the terminologies of diversity and the labeling of diversity and the labeling of people of color diminish the power that we have as a black community, and it must not be looked upon as we're looking for separatism. It has to be a political fact. You have a caucus. It's called the Black Caucus, and I'm not talking about the Congressional Black Caucus. That is a separate organization of elected officials. The caucus that we're talking about is the lobby that Black people have collectively and collaboratively when they move in a block to vote. And if they would move in a block to vote according to their own issues that the people, raise, as opposed to what a party says is their platform, and then you have power to negotiate and to structure change for the masses and the multitude. But if you hide behind diversity and hide behind the banners that someone else assigned you as saying that we're talking about people of color and minorities, then you have these select few jobs. Now, these select few positions of prestige now having to be divided up among people of color and the minorities. So now you have the Asian American, the Hispanic American, the Cuban American, and Puerto Rican all vying for a few prestigious jobs. And people, the multitudes are not gaining and making the advancement because their issues are being tossed away in exchange for a few prestigious jobs. And now these various groups under the banner of people of color, under the banner of minorities, are now jockeying for position to get these few jobs, these few positions. The first African American female to hold this position, the first Asian American to hold this position, the first Cuban American to hold this position, and the elevation of the whole group to the status of equality is not going to be achieved if the fight continues among the labels of the diversity and the labels of minority. If the battle then becomes how do you jockey for position to get the most of these available crumbs to take home to your particular community, and and then we're dividing up these issues, which causes divisions because now I have to decide and make a decision based on what will be left in terms of my job of my job that I can come back and say to my people, well, see, if you continue to stay with the reserve clause and vote for this along this particular party, we'll continue to get some of these prestigious titles. But once again, the multitudes and the millions of people and the masses are being left behind because issues of the people are not being articulated in such a manner that they are reaching the people that can make a decision. But the fight is for a few jobs. They were outstanding baseball players and outstanding football players. They were all stars and had prestigious position and won the awards as all stars and most valuable players. And but the multitude, we lost the Negro Baseball League. And I could say more about the golf, the black golfers, all these things. You have to keep them in the context of what we have learned and how we have learned to use the negotiation power of the strength that you possess and not give it away because of a reserve clause. Change has to come, and it starts inside when we look at our history and what two men could accomplish. And now millions can't advance because the leaders want the masses to stay locked into a reserve clause so they can retain individual power as opposed to dealing with the issues. We have to wake up. And I think our young people are going to wake up. I think they're coming alive to understand that they need black political free agency to bring about the change. Why should they be a ghetto in the 21st century where black people reside in every city, every major metropolitan area, when you have the political power to set your issues at the forefront to bring about change for the multitude, as opposed to jockeying for position that get crumbs of a few good jobs and lead a few parades. When you have the power and you learn to negotiate.
This is Brother to Brother Talk. We will take a break and we'll be right back. I'm Mark Carbone, Managing Director of the Midwest Minority Think Tank. We'll be back with more solution-driven dialogue on Brother to Brother Talk.
Beef.com.
Well, once again, I'm Mark Carbone, Managing Director of the Midwest Minority Think Tank, and thank you for joining us tonight as we I've looked in more in depth at Black political free agency. Until we make that distinction, to be bold as the individuals that we have centered on tonight, Kurt Flood and R.C. Owens, two men who changed the economic structure of pro sports, that whole industry. Two men changed the way of life through taking a stand that cost them, but it's paved the way for others to have great resources and a platform from which to speak. I'm Mark Carbon-Knowles, Managing Director of Midwest Minority Think Tank. Thank you for joining us on Brother to Brother Talk.
Oh, you got it too.